Painting is a nuanced process for me, and that starts with the canvas. I usually paint on cotton canvases that come factory-coated with acrylic gesso. While I sometimes go the DIY route by stretching and preparing my own canvases, these days I find it more efficient to rely on suppliers who offer high-quality professionally prepared canvases. This allows me to put my full focus on the art of painting itself. In my quest for the perfect surface, I always like to apply a couple of additional layers of gesso to the canvas. This creates a smoother texture, which I find essential for highly detailed work. In fact, whenever I'm preparing a canvas, my goal is to minimize the visible texture so that I can focus on the finer details of the painting. This is particularly important when working on smaller pieces, like the tulip I'm painting. When it comes to the texture of the canvas, finding the right balance is crucial. If the canvas is too smooth, the paint will simply slide off, lacking any tooth to hold onto. On the other hand, if it's too coarse, it's challenging to work on intricate details. So, it's all about finding that middle ground that complements my artistic needs. As for the priming process, I usually use oil paint. However, this time I decided to experiment with Michael Harding's non-absorbent acrylic primer. Despite its label indicating that it's non-absorbent, this primer has a curious capacity to quickly soak up paint. The paint adheres well and dries incredibly fast, enabling me to add another layer just a day later. While this quick drying aspect makes it unsuitable for layered techniques, where you would want a slower drying time for blending, it's perfect for quicker paintings where time is of the essence. When I'm considering the color of the primer or ground layer that I use in my paintings, I often enjoy taking some creative liberties and experimenting. Most often, when I employ the direct painting technique, a method where paint is applied directly without layers, I gravitate toward a darker primer. To give you a sense of the tone, imagine a grayscale ranging from 1 to 20. The value of the primer I commonly use would be situated around the midpoint, specifically at a value of 10. This mid-value is my foundational starting point, and as I delve deeper into the artwork, I broaden the range of values, extending from the darker to the lighter shades within that grayscale spectrum. The choice of a darker primer is heavily influenced by techniques dating back to the Baroque era, encompassing traditional underpaintings. In those times, the primer's tone was leveraged in halftones to such an extent that it often supplanted the need for additional shading, a topic I've discussed at length in other posts and publications. Now, regarding the hue of my primer, it consistently carries a warm, earthy undertone. I find this particularly beneficial when painting areas of shadow. The primer's hue has a way of optically warming up the shadowed regions, adding a sense of depth and richness. During the painting process, I consciously strive to allow portions of the primer to remain at least semi-visible in areas that are in shadow or halftones. This means that even when I utilize a direct painting technique, I aim to harness the advantages that are traditionally associated with layered painting approaches, albeit with paint applied in just a single layer. Ultimately, I believe it's a missed opportunity not to make full use of that initial layer. The layers that are allowed to show through contribute a lifelike quality to the shadow areas, and lend an overall airy appearance to the finished work. Therefore, the key lies in maintaining a sense of transparency and achieving a balanced proportion between applying a heavier coat of paint in illuminated areas, and a more subtle layer in regions of shadow. When you're using a warm imprimatura as the basis for direct painting, you're stepping into a zone with some inherent challenges. First and foremost, let's remember that in the realm of painting, everything exists in relation. To figure out whether a specific tone or shade is light or dark, you have to have a point of comparison. You're essentially playing a game of contrast. When a particular hue is put against a light background, it's inevitably going to appear darker. Conversely, when that same hue is placed on a dark background, it will look considerably lighter. This is a cornerstone lesson in understanding tonal contrasts. Now, this doesn't just stop at shades and tones, it extends into the saturation and temperature of colors as well. A color can look intensely vibrant or somewhat muted, feel warm or cool, depending on the other colors it's juxtaposed with. If you've read my color theory book, you'll recognize this as a fundamental principle: a color is perceived based on its environmental context. Why is this important, you ask? Well, when you're working with a warm imprimatura, it's crucial to note that any colors you add on top of it will tend to look cooler than their actual hue. So if your painting predominantly features cool shades, you're not going to run into too many problems. However, if your artwork leans towards the warm end of the spectrum, you'll find that certain colors, such as sienna and umber, don't appear as vibrant or warm as they truly are. Learning to accurately gauge the temperature of colors when working with a warm imprimatura is largely an experiential skill. The more you paint in this style, the more accustomed you'll become to the nuanced temperature shifts, allowing you to adapt and work freely. A pro tip to aid in this process is to use a gray-shaded mixing palette. In my own practice, I use a glass palette with a layer of gray paper beneath it. This setup provides a neutral backdrop that helps me perceive the true temperature of colors more objectively than when they are directly applied to the canvas. In terms of the background's color palette, I've once again implemented the concept of cool and warm colors, a topic I frequently delve into. Similar to the alternating cool and warm tones seen on a tulip, the light's temperature manifests itself in the background. Despite the fact that, in this particular artwork, the temperature differences aren't as conspicuous. The painting's color scheme predominantly features cool tones, imparting a cool bluish undertone to the background. The right portion of the background leans towards cooler shades, with an overarching presence of ultramarine blue. On the other hand, the left side of the background has been subtly warmed with burnt umber, and in the upper segment where light permeates the composition, I intensified the warmth of the mixture further by incorporating transparent red oxide. In wrapping things up, I'm working on the stem and leaves situated at the lower part of the arrangement. They boast a mighty dark green, not overly striking, sometimes almost a grayish-green tint, and this serves two purposes. Firstly, I aim to keep them from causing too much disturbance, letting the viewer's eye focus primarily on the tulip flower. The tulip, set against the dark backdrop, forms a bold tonal contrast that naturally seizes your attention. Secondly, concerning the color harmony, I tailored their green local color to match the overall color palette of the painting. So, the green hue doesn't create a striking color contrast, rather, it seamlessly integrates into the cool color scheme. The same principle applies to texture and details. I approach the leaves mostly with a big brush, creating a simple sketch without delving into pronounced intricacies. I mix the green using cadmium yellow deep and ultramarine blue. This blue, in terms of warmth, leans more towards the red-purple spectrum, compared to cobalt blue for example. The ultramarine blue carries a hint of red, moving closer to the spectrum of red-purple in the color wheel. Similar principles apply to cadmium yellow deep, which possesses a warm, orange undertone veering towards the realm of red. Given that red complements green, this combination yields subdued green tones seamlessly integrated into my cool and low chromatic color palette. Nevertheless, you can still notice subtle temperature variations on the leaves, which I really like, and I incorporate them wherever possible. This is particularly relevant to the leaf on the right side, which is more or less perpendicular to the light source. Despite being shaded by the flower, it receives a certain amount of light. Due to the light penetrating the leaf, the shade on the opposite side of the leaf has a richer warm tone. Yep, for those who know, I'm talking about subsurface scattering again. I achieved this effect not by mixing the appropriate color but by allowing a bit of the warm background to show through in this part. I applied a slightly more diluted color and let the background play its role. Here, as you can see, the layered painting effect comes into play again, even though it's a direct painting technique.